I'm ready to start the bind off on another spruce scrunchie, and so I thought I would show you guys the technique that I use to bind it off and seam it together at the same time. So here's what the finished result looks like. It creates this really nice edge that looks good on both sides of the scrunchie, and you're binding it off and seaming it all in one step. So once you're done with that, the scrunchie is finished and the elastic hair tie gets inserted as you're doing it too. So it's basically very similar to a 3-needle bind off, except the cast on stitches are not live stitches. So you're going to be picking up stitches in the cast on edge and knitting them together with the live stitches as you're binding off. I'm at the beginning of the round, ready to start the bind off, and so I'm going to go ahead and remove my stitch marker, and then I'm going to follow this first stitch down and find the corresponding cast on stitch. And if you did a long tail cast on, it's going to be one stitch to the left of where this tail is coming through. So this is going to be the first cast on stitch here. And if you want to, you can always mark like the stitch above it with a pin so that you can find it real easily, or you can just find it again from the tail there. And then I'm going to fold the elastic hair tie inside the fabric. Just like that, because we're going to be inserting the hair tie as we're binding off and joining the edges together all at the same time. So then I'm going to go into the first stitch and then find that first cast on stitch, which here's where my tail is coming from. So it's going to be this one over here. And I'm going to pick it up and knit it together with the first stitch. And then I'm going to go into the next stitch and then go into the next cast on stitch. And you want to make sure that you're catching both strands of the cast on edge there. So both of those, and then knit those two together. And I found it was a little bit easier to just pull it through one at a time until I got going. That way nothing slipped off that shouldn't. And then we're going to bind off the first stitch. So just pull it up, over, and off. And then I'm going to knit the next two together. And just make sure that you're just going over one stitch each time in the cast on edge. And then bind off the next stitch. Then we'll knit the next two together. It's a little bit fiddly, but it sure is nice to have the bind off and the seaming all done in one step. So you're just going to keep doing that all the way around, just knitting the next stitch with the and then picking up the corresponding cast on edge stitch and knitting them together, and then binding off. And then as you go, just make sure you keep folding this around the elastic hair tie so that when you get all the way around, it will be inside of the knitted fabric. And then once you get the bind off done, you'll just have the two ends to weave in, and then your scrunchie will be finished.